Thank you for tuning into Abundant Moments. I was thinking about David today, young David that we read about in 1 Samuel. David was just a young boy, about in his teens, and he had already been anointed to be the next king of Israel. And he was the outcast of his family. 7 sons his father Jesse had, and he was the least favorite out of all the sons. And his people were going through a very, very difficult time. They were in a war. And as they were in this war for 40 days, they had been in a war where their enemy was coming out every day and taunting them. Everybody was in fear. They were so afraid. They were hiding in the trenches. They were there for war, but they were just so filled with fear, and nobody knew what to do, and nobody wanted to step up to the plate. So Jesse, David's father, sent him to check on his brothers because they were off fighting in the war against the Philistines. And when David went there, he found his oldest brother, Eliab. He was in the trenches. So he took him some food as his dad told him to. And he said, what's going on? And he said, well, we got this giant and he comes out every day and we don't have anyone that can go up against him. He's huge. He's humongous. And everybody's afraid. Well, David looked at his brother and said, why doesn't somebody go up against him? And Eliab felt intimidated by that. And David, I believe, knew who he was and knew who God was that they served, and he was not fearful. So Eliab sort of put him down and said, David, just go home and take care of those few sheep that you have. In other words, your life is insignificant. Just go back home. But David said, I'll go up against him. And you all know the story. Eliab, probably because he despised his own brother, which is terrible, he went to the king. King Saul said, hey, my brother David will go up against this giant. And he was probably wanting to get rid of David or make David then say, oh, no, I'm afraid. But either way, it comes down to it where David goes up against the giant. One small boy, one huge giant, but one great big God. And David was in covenant with God. Because he said, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that's coming up against us? And circumcision was a sign that you were in covenant with God. David knew the Philistines didn't have a covenant with God. So therefore, he was not afraid. I want to tell you today, the covenant that you and I have with God is far greater than the Old Testament, the Old Covenant. The covenant that we have with God is not a covenant built upon the blood of animals, but it's the blood of Jesus Christ that settled it once and for all. And young David, knowing who he was in God, knowing the God whom he served, did not retreat. But when the enemy came out, Goliath came out, he ran toward him, and he had victory that day. I want to encourage you today, do not retreat. Don't run from fear, but run toward it with your faith in God, knowing your covenant that you have. Your covenant, God promised he would never leave us or forsake us. The covenant that we have through Jesus Christ, he redeemed us from all of the curse of sin. Thank God for that. All of the curse, depression, oppression, sickness, disease, lack, shame, guilt, sin. We are the redeemed of the Lord. So run today in faith, walk by faith. Do not be afraid. Do not retreat, but be as David and stand strong, knowing who you are, knowing the God that you serve is for you and not against you. And you too will see victory. Thank you for tuning in.